say that. If you study history, right? I mean, well, if you take second semester world history, at least if you teach it the way I do, the very second lesson is on the Reformation. Christendom had a Reformation. Christendom had a counter-Reformation. What is a Reformation and why is it needed? Well, every group gets some practice going on that is wrong. And when they do, somebody from now, I'm in Christendom. Christendom has had a lot of abuses, but I challenge anyone to find an abuse, and I've been looking for 40 years, some abuse that wasn't followed by a call for reform. Well, what's an abuse? The Inquisition. There was an abuse, followed by a call for reform. The sale of indulgences, there was a sale of forgiveness for sins. There was a call for reform. Martin Luther spoke hard against the sale of indulgences, reform. Taking tens of thousands of black people out of Africa, making slaves. That was an abuse, but there was a call for reform. In other parts of the world, you have cases where that young girls as young as 9 years old expect to marry, and when their husband dies, they have to throw themselves in the fire and burn themselves. I call that an abuse. There's no call for reform, except from outside. In other words, Islam is incapable of reform. 100 years ago, there was a man who was called the Martin Luther of Islam who went around preaching reform and trying to get them to change. They can't. They won't change. It's difficult to negotiate with them, especially since Muhammad taught them to not negotiate with the unbelievers. And if you do, only when it's to your advantage to where you can negotiate in such a way as to eventually get the upper hand. Then stab them in the back as soon as you get a chance to. They have not ceased fighting from the beginning. All right. It's pretty obvious that this might belong more in a theology class, but I mentioned this one. I mentioned it now. That a lot of them are descended from Ishmael, one of Abraham's sons. And when Ishmael was a teenager or so, an angel appeared to his mother and said that Ishmael would be a wild donkey of a man. His hand would be against everybody, and everybody's hand would be against him. This has been true largely down through the ages. Now, they don't quit fighting, but a lot of the fighting they do is among themselves. Right now, Yemen is fighting Arabia. Syria is fighting Syria. Libya has been fighting Libya for a few years. Egypt is fighting Egypt. And for a while, Tunisia was fighting Tunisia. They do constant fighting among themselves. And Israel is on the verge of another war with the Palestinians. At least I heard that a few days ago. There's just simply no quitting, no quit. It's a clash of medieval versus modern. ISIS and Al-Qaeda have fought the 700s up to the 21st century and given us a taste of what 700s ideals were like. It's a clash of freedom versus control. In their conflicts, the other person is always wrong. All right, now I'll give you an example. Osama bin Laden was responsible for killing about 3,000 persons on September 11th. We finally moved in and killed Osama bin Laden. Okay, justifiably so. Well, guess what? Some of them say, okay, you killed our man, we're going to kill some of yours because of the way you killed Osama bin Laden. In other words, we take any action against them, we're always on the wrong, they're always in the right, they can do anything they please, and yet they're right, and yet we're wrong. So the fight goes on. You cannot... All right. 1,500 years of fighting is going on. It died down largely after the fall of Constantinople, well, actually, no, it went on for 200 years after that. Then in 1683, they got as far as Vienna and were stopped at Vienna. Then after that came the Industrial Revolution, and the technological revolution went one way. All Europe and none of Islam. And for a long time, you never heard much from them. They were like a sleepy part of the world. Then in 1905, we discovered oil in a lot of their territories, and they became rich. I want to say this about the oil. I had a young woman try to tell me that the Western world was stealing their oil. You can believe what you will, but here's the way it actually happened. We found oil in their territory. Because the territory belonged to them, we said, okay, we'll bring in the drills, we'll bring in the heavy equipment, we'll bring in the railroad cars that we need. We'll drill for you, but we'll pay you because it's your land. The Arabs said to the Westerners, bring in the drills, bring in the railroads, and then they took over and took everything and told them, hey, go home, it's ours now. That is why a lot of Western firms will not deal with them. Now, there is one Western country that did the same thing, the land of Venezuela. Some of you might have heard of Venezuela is now one of the poorest countries in the world. A few years ago, they were one of the richest. And it's not because they've run out of oil. All right, about the oil business. In 1972, I read an article about in U.S. News and Report, and this was Standard Time, that within 50 years, the world is going to run out of oil. 46 years have gone by. Nobody is saying that. Now, I don't know how my dad knew this, but my dad would laugh at these people who said the world was running out of oil. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe, I don't know where he got his info. But we have found more oil than we knew existed back then. And we've also made another startling discovery. The earth beneath us is creating more oil than we're burning, and fast we're burning it. You've not heard that before?
I haven't heard that.
Yeah. It's the earth beneath our feet. You know, you probably haven't heard anything about us running out of oil anytime soon either. We have more oil reserve, and we're able to tell Saudi Arabia and a lot of those Middle Eastern, we don't need your oil anymore. We have plenty of our own. Well, of course, we had a president a few years ago who didn't want to go that route. Today's president, I think, might. Go ahead, we're going to start drilling for our own oil and tell these countries we don't need your oil now. But anyway, they got rich by oil, and then we started hearing from them again. What are some of the practical results now of the Islam religion? All right, at first, in the beginning, they were far ahead of Westerners. They were ahead in two fields. Astronomy and medicine. Now, you might not know how important astronomy is, but if you study the history of science, when Europe started its scientific revolution, the science of astronomy led the way. But Islamic people were excellent astronomers. All right. A lot of the stars have Arabic names. You asked me to be specific. Now, a lot of the constellations are Greek, but the stars, the individual stars, have Arabic names. They did as well as they could have, perhaps without the use of a telescope, but they made one huge mistake. Way back yonder, this man we've talked about, he was a general in Alexander the Great's army, and then he started the line of Ptolemies that ruled Egypt until Cleopatra's day. So from the time of Alexander to the time of Cleopatra, the family name of that ruled Egypt was Ptolemy. One of these Ptolemies was a scientist, an astronomer. He gave us a view of the universe that was to last the next 1,800 years. He believed that the earth was the center of the universe, and every day the sun went around the earth, the moon went around the earth, and all the planets went around the earth, and the stars did too. with the earth being located here at the center, his view of the universe was wrong. Nobody questioned it for 1,800 years. And the Arabs, being the type of people they were, they went along with Ptolemy's worldview without question. It was up to a European named Copernicus to finally say, hey, I believe that this view of the universe that we've been following for 1,800 years is wrong. Then came the invention of telescope, and it pretty well proved it. Ptolemy was wrong. But the reason I'm bringing that up is a lot of times science is wrong. Do I think anything that science is teaching today is wrong? Definitely do, and I'll get to that in a few minutes. But yes, science can be wrong. All right. Now, speaking of, folk, where is the center of the universe? All right. I want to tell you something before I answer the question. Way back, before my time, many years before my time, doctors practiced what's called herbal medicine. They'd go around and dig up roots and collect herbs, and they'd say this herb cures colds, this herb cures arthritis, this herbal medicine is today looked on as, then when I was a kid, herbal medicine was looked on as being primitive. So we practiced herbal medicine, we went away from it, but in recent times, we're going back to herbal medicines again. This is not unheard of for persons to go back and forth. Now, I'm not saying that all doctors don't prescribe herbs, but I will say this about herbs, so be careful, because some herbs will restore your kidneys, and we don't know some of the side effects of some herbs, so be careful what herbs you take. Take them sparingly is my advice, but I'm not a professional. All right, now why do I say this? Because in the idea of where is the center of the universe? Ptolemy believed it was the earth. Okay. Ptolemy lived more than 2,000 years ago. 500 years ago, Copernicus said, no, the center of the universe is the sun. Then we got more knowledge, and well, whoops, hey, the universe is huge. But now that we're actually looking around, everywhere we look, we see the same things. Distant stars seem to be moving away from us. Guess what, folks? It looks like the earth is, in fact, the center of the universe. Now, again, of course, I've been told, and this is probably true, that anywhere you are in the universe, wherever you are, is going to appear to be the center. That might be the case. Now, what moves? All right, if you were standing on the sun and looking at the earth, yeah, the earth moves. But then along came in 1905, along came a man named Albert Einstein, a genius, and he said that all motion is relative. So if you're standing on the surface of the earth and say, okay, the sun has moved since 8 o'clock this morning. In a lot of ways, you're correct. 8 o'clock this morning, the sun was still in the eastern sky. At 3 in the afternoon, the sun is fast heading to the west. Relative to the surface of the earth, the sun has moved. Any of you follow what I'm saying? I mean, you might not have heard it put that way, but Einstein, his theory is called the theory of, you guessed it, relativity. That all motion is relative. So, if you're in space, and you see somebody moving, and you think you're standing still, but to that person, he's standing still, and you're the one who's moving. If you're driving a car, you're stopping at a red light, and all of a sudden you start rolling backwards. And you slam on the brakes hard because you're afraid of hitting the car behind you, and you're still rolling backwards. No, it's the car next to you is inching forward a little bit, and it makes you think that you're going backwards. Or maybe the car next to you starts rolling backwards, and you think you're going forward. And all of you probably experienced this at one time or another. Again, relative motion. But you measure speed of cars by the motion relative to the ground beneath your feet. All right. Now, okay, what are some practical results? In the 800s, an Iranian mathematician developed algebra. Very important. Europeans didn't have it. Now, if you know anything about math, You start off in elementary school with basic arithmetic, the 4 basic functions, add, subtract, multiply, and divide. You cannot go to advanced mathematics until first you start with algebra. You have to know algebra before you can do trigonometry, you have to know algebra before you can do calculus, etc., etc. With algebra, these Arabs should have blown the rest of the world off the map, and they should have taken over. It's that important. So you can't construct a building like this without knowing algebra. You can't construct an airplane without knowing algebra, or advanced theories of structural engineering. You can't do structural engineering without starting with algebra. Very important. They also invented, they didn't invent it. They're credited with inventing the zero. Zero is the center of all numbers. Numbers go in both directions from zero outward, negative and positive. Without the number zero, you cannot do even complex arithmetic problems. Now, I recently learned, I used to think that the Arabs invented, but they started using Arabic numerals, and they taught Arabic numerals to Europeans. Now, very important, all right, because before this time, Europeans were using Roman numerals. I want to add something. All right. Ten times 2 equals, all right, folk, I'm faking that. Now you can do arithmetic with Roman numerals, but it's tough. If you ask me to divide 1,024 into 3,039 using Roman numerals, I can't do it. Now, any average 9-year-old can do that using Arabic numerals. And you know the number I gave has a zero in it. Again, Roman numerals has no provision for zero. But again, these inventions that they had, plus what they knew about astronomy, plus what they knew about medicine, should have propelled them to the top of the world. But they ran into 2 snags. Snag number 1, the uncivilized Turks came in. The Turks converted to Islam, but the Turks insisted on such a heavy interpretation of the Quran that it was impossible to change. In other words, no room for dissent. And this leads to why that the Islam, that when the world had a scientific revolution, it left Islam behind, and this bothers them. No room for dissent. If you study the history of inventions, when the Wright brothers invented the airplane, a college professor said it can't be done. So the Wright brothers did it. If the Wright brothers had lived in an Islamic country, they would have invented nothing. If Thomas Edison had lived in a Muslim country, he would have invented nothing. Now, let that sink in. All right, how do I know that? Because nobody from that part of the world has invented anything in 1,000 years. Why can't they invent? They don't allow the freedom to disagree. No freedom to dissent. Robert Fulton, the man who invented the steamship, they called him Fulton's Folly. And when he got the thing in the water, the thing didn't work. This is not untypical. I mean, I put together a lot of gadgets, and half of them haven't worked when I first tried them out. Fulton said, give me a little bit of time. He worked on it, and after a while, he got the crowd solid because the big paddle wheels started turning, and the thing started moving upstream against the current. Another man whose idea was called Folly was a man named Drake. He was drilling for oil. Everybody called it Drake's Folly. All of a sudden, oil gushed out. Folks, this is important because there's just not enough whales in the world to have kept today's airplanes and automobiles and trains and all that going. Not enough whales, but before that we were using whale oil. Now we're getting our oil from the ground. And I just mentioned There's quite a bit of it. Okay. So in other words, all their advances were put to a halt. Now, the other thing that caused their advance to halt was, and this happens inevitably, their science came into conflict with theology. This happened among Christians also, but the difference was in Christianity, science still progressed and marched on. In Islam, scientific progress was stopped. All right, what was the conflict? There were several conflicts between Islam and science. Conflict number one, all right. Science today teaches that the universe came about over periods of billions of years with a Big Bang. Islam teaches the universe was created. I'm going to take the side of the Quran on that one, Islam. This is personal, folks. Islam teaches the earth was created 6,000 years ago. Science teaches it took billions of years. Now, this might sound nutty, but I'm going to say it. I'm going to take the side of Islam on that one. Science says that man evolved. Islam says man created from dust. I'll take the side of Islam. But now after this, it gets harder to take Islam's side. Islam seems to teach that the earth is flat. One man said he stood on the edge of the earth and watched the sun go down, and the sun dropped into a lake, but he couldn't get to the other side. I mean, the earth was too big to travel by foot to the other side, so he didn't get to see it come up the next day. He saw it go down. Have a difficult time with that one, folks. I can't take Islam's side. Also, they've estimated the size of the moon to be about 120 miles in diameter. I can't take Islam's side on that one. Yeah, that's what, there's a place, I can't point it out to you, but I've heard there's a passage in their writings that says that the moon is 120 miles in diameter. Again, time has proven them to be wrong. But what they did when their science and theology conflicted, now, as they gave up on science and let theology rule. Now, folks, I will say this, I do believe in a lot of cases science is wrong. Just over the weekend, I was reading an article about the star Betelgeuse, and it said the star Betelgeuse is a big bright red star in the northern sky. It's visible. It's about to nova. But when I got to reading closer, they don't know how far away Betelgeuse is because every time they measure it has a different distance. And they can't tell exactly what size it is because every time they measure it, it comes out a little bit different. When I was a kid, for instance, Betelgeuse was supposed to go out as far as the orbit of Earth. You know, it's as big as the distance from the Earth to the Sun. Now they have it all the way out to Jupiter. Really, really much larger than they had it then. The fact is, what we know about the universe outside our own solar system, folks, can actually be summed up in one word. And that word has 7 letters. Anybody guess what word I'm thinking of? The 7-letter word that describes what we really know about the universe outside our solar system. That word is, anybody know? Nothing. I'm not saying we shouldn't try to learn, but in the world of subatomic particles, again, what we actually know about the world of subatomic particles can really be summed up in one word. Now, that is nothing. Subatomic particles is very interesting in that these subatomic particles will behave one way when we're observing them and seem to behave another way when they're not being observed. I don't know how many of you have heard that, but this you could ask your physics teacher. It's supposed to be so. Why is that? Again, I don't know. And also, I have heard every theory. All right, on a practical level, we have better gadgets. Our computers are better than they were a few years ago. Our cars are much better than they were a few years ago. That's practical science. Now, there's another kind of science called theoretical science. Every theory we have about the universe has some compelling reason why it can't be true. So, again, if it seems like science is conflicting with theology, don't worry about it too much. Eventually, science might come around. we might just decide that we have misinterpreted our theology. But it's not just Islamic people. The Chinese also let their philosophers stop their development of science. The Chinese, Islam, and India were once far ahead of the Europeans, far ahead. If you could visit the Earth 1,000 years ago from space, and never seen the Earth before, stay a while and look around, and then come back 1,000 years later, you'd probably be surprised to learn, hey, it was these Europeans who made most of the discoveries and inventions that brought them out of, from the horse and buggy days to the days of airplanes and automobiles. Around the year 1000, I'm going to say this being of European descent, Europeans would appear to be some of the dumbest people on the face of the earth. All right. And I'm saying this being of European descent myself. And yet they were the ones who actually made the discoveries that changed practically everybody. All right, now, for this part, don't anyone write this down, but I want to include it anyway. American liberalism. Something fishy is going on. American liberalism and Islam have some serious differences, and yet American liberalism seems to favor Islam. What's the difference? All right, here's one of them. Islam calls for having as many children as you can. The average Islamic woman has 8 babies per woman. American liberalism calls for curbing the population. And yet, the liberals see no conflict. Liberalism favors abortion. Islam does not. This is ignored by the liberals. Islam recommends death to apostates. Liberalism claims that you should be free to believe what you want to. And yet, liberalism does not condemn Islam. Islam has mutilated women to keep them faithful to their husbands. And liberalism has hardly said a word against it. And liberalism claims to be pro-woman's rights. And yet Islam subjugates women to the point of outright ownership. And liberalism says little against it. Islam recommends death to apostates. Liberalism claims that they believe in tolerance. Islam calls for death to homosexuals. Liberalism calls for tolerance for homosexuals. And yet, liberalism, Islam, no conflict. I believe I mentioned last class that Islam has prayer rooms in American public schools, and the liberals don't utter a word of protest. Let a Christian organization try that. The unequal treatment of women found in so many Muslim countries, the liberals favor. All right, now, give you an example. A great champion of women's rights. I don't like it close to modern time, but in this case, I don't think it was proven wrong. I have made a statement about modern time, got out the door in a few days, found out I was wrong. But this time, I don't think we've proven wrong.